Hello, welcome to the Pots and Trowels podcast. I'm Martin Fish and I'm joined as usual by Jill and Sean.
Hi.
Hello, and we're going to talk all things gardening again this week.
Yeah, specifically, we're going to be having a chat about digging for victory, which is an older concept, but yeah, we'll have a little chat about that. And then also a very interesting, relatively new concept of dead hedges. I don't know if you've ever come across those before, but we're going to have a chat about them.
I'm sure I've killed plenty of hedges in my
No,
time.
not that sort of dead hedge.
If you've got a question for Martin, drop us an email, info@potsandtrowels.com, or just put a comment on one of our videos or something and we'll try and get around to answering it. But anyway, before we get to a question from you and some information about dead hedges, let's hear from Andrew from Life on Pig Row.
So Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me today. Lots of people probably don't know you as Andrew Oldham, but I'm sure they'll know you by your other persona, which is Life on Pig Row, on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Big following, and you know what you do is great. So we're going to have a little chat about what you do. But to start with, Andrew, could you tell me how you got into gardening? Because I know gardening hasn't been your career throughout your life. You've sort of come into it as a second career. So just tell us a little bit about your background.
I mean, I started out as an English major after university. I was the first person in my family to go to university. And from there, I had a choice. I could become a teacher or become a journalist. So I ended up being a journalist for a while for the BBC. And then I was given the opportunity to be a writer at the BBC in theatre. So I ended up writing for a number of theatres. And I ended up writing for the BBC. I was on the Eastenders team for a while, and I was on the Doctors team for a while. They were only very short-lived because I wasn't very satisfied with it. I was always more interested in writing fiction and poetry, so I went back to that. And yeah, I came to gardening kind of in a very strange way. My dad had been a gardener when I was little, but I wasn't particularly interested in it. He had an allotment, and I always associated with allotments of me carting stuff around. So my dad saying, "Take this, take that, carry this, carry that," and I really hated it. And then when I was 29, I was hit by a car in Bradford. And it wasn't anything particularly bad. I got back up after the crash and the driver drove off. So it was hit and run. And a month later, I woke up and I couldn't walk. And I ended up in hospital. I ended up in physio. And I was told that my disc had imploded, which is kind of really harsh for someone in their 20s because you're quite active in your 20s. And suddenly I went from being 29 to feeling like I was 81. And I had a very good consultant. It was the consultant who recommended gardening to me. I only had a small garden at that point, and I thought he was having a joke because, again, I went back to my dad lifting things, digging things, and so forth and so on. And he said, no. He said, there's all this other way of gardening. He said, the great thing about gardening, he said, if you're doing one thing and you're hurting, go do something else. So he said, it's better than going to the gym because you can always move your body around and stretch it. So that's how I got into gardening, kind of through the back door. So,
and obviously you've taken to it like a duck to water, and made it not only just a career, it's become very much a lifestyle for you. I'm intrigued though about the script writing. It always fascinates me when you watch programmes, because writing a story, I suppose, is one thing, but when you're writing a script, I suppose you've got to get inside the head of each of those characters, and they've all got different sort of mannerisms, so it must be quite difficult to do.
Yeah. So when I was on Doctors, you used to get, I mean, it's going back quite a few years now, you got what was called the Bible. And the Bible was every character and every ailment and disease they'd ever done. And you were told you can't do them again. This is what we've done. This is what we've not done. With Eastenders, I was only there a very short time, but I worked under Tony Jordan, and Tony Jordan was really good. And he would teach you how they put a program together. And it was very mathematical in a way. Almost like designing a plot. You'd have this grid on the board, and he'd tell you about what character to appear in, what scene, and what the story arc was over an entire season. And that was really fascinating. So yeah, you had to get under the skin of it, and you had to get to know the characters. I mean, I'm going back a long time ago now. I mean, when I was writing it, Arthur was still in it. So that's quite a long time ago now. I don't particularly miss it because it was very prescriptive, and I think in my gardening, even though I've learnt a lot of techniques and I've done a lot of courses, I've still got that kind of artistic background to myself where I'll try things out to see if they work. Mainly because of where I garden, because I'm 1,330 feet above sea level. I'm on the side of the Pennines, and what works for someone down in the valley doesn't work for me. So I've got to find different ways of putting plants together and plant combinations.
Yeah.
Weird and strange things. Like you think lupins wouldn't do very well up here, and lupins grow like a weed for us. But we really struggle with herbs, and all my herbs, which used to be in the garden, in my old garden, in the ground, all have to be in pots for us so we can move them around as the season gets worse.
And I suppose that altitude, 1,330 feet, yes, it's going to be, the weather can change quite quickly. So where exactly are you? Are you?
So we're in disputed territory. We're in Saddleworth. So depending on who you talk to, you're in Lancashire, Yorkshire, or Greater Manchester. And there's always an argument which one you are. I mean, I'm Lancastrian born and bred, and I say we're in Yorkshire, so which I have no problem with. But there's people out there in Saddleworth who go, no, 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 no. I can hear them screaming now, going, no, we're in Lancashire, we're in Greater Manchester, and that's where we are. And the Saddleworth is notorious for its weather. It can get incredibly bad snowstorms. It can get incredibly bad wind. And I've sat in the garden and seen 4 types of weather pass through in the space of an hour.
Yeah. Well, it always amazes me when you drive over the M62. If I'm going from Yorkshire across to Manchester, you go and it's the highest bit where you get the change of county from Yorkshire to Lancashire, and you can guarantee that the car thermometer will drop a few degrees.
Literally, if you get out at junction 22 on Wave, we'll probably see you.
Oh, right. I'll do that next time.
We're not that far from it. So yeah, we're up on the tops, and yeah, it is wild and woolly, but I love it. I love that fierce nature. I love the fact that when we first came here, I was told we couldn't have an orchard, that you couldn't grow an orchard up here. Fruit trees wouldn't grow this high up. And I went out and I went to heritage suppliers, and I found a load of Yorkshire varieties, and I planted them, and they've all done incredibly well. Whereas when I went I think I planted a Braeburn, and you think a Braeburn would do okay, and it keeled over and died.
I think that's it, though, isn't it? If it's a Yorkshire variety, it's an old variety, a heritage one. It's one that's been bred and survived growing in quite cool, harsh conditions for sometimes hundreds of years. So it does make sense that they're going to probably do better than a lot of the modern hybrids. So life on Pig Row is based where you now live, up there on Saddleworth Hills. So how did that come about? How did life on Pig Row start?
Well, initially, I wanted to keep a blog because I was new to gardening. We just moved from our old house, which was been a 3-story weaver's cottage, and I couldn't cope with the stairs anymore, so we had to get somewhere a bit smaller. And because I was completely new to gardening and blogging was kind of new at that point, I thought, well, I'm going to keep a blog just to keep a note of what I'm doing. And really, it was very mundane, those kind of early posts of what I planted, where they planted, and so forth and so on. And I thought, I like the story here behind the vegetables I'm growing and what I'm doing to plant and being a disabled gardener. And I've started telling that story, and that it started to take off from there. And then I think about 2011 we did it. We decided, because we've both been made redundant because austerity had just come in, that we'd do a Dig for Victory garden because we were panicking and we had no idea how to garden. So I turned to Dig for Victory, as many people do. And I was kind of amazed at the really bad information that was out there for Dig for Victory. And I started to play with the history of it and find out more and more about it and how much of it was propaganda and how much of it was true. And it was just so fascinating. And you started to kind of cultivate your land more and more. And you think they must have been so frustrated in the Second World War when things didn't go right. And you find out all these lovely little stories. And we called it Pig Row because when we came here, obviously I had one name where I lived when I was writing about it. A neighbour told us that these cottages used to be called Pig Row. And there was 2 kind of arguments behind it, whether they kept pigs, which was the logical one. And I have found pig bones. That was not a nice day when I dug up a pig femur and thought it was human. Or that they were so poor, they couldn't even afford pig leather because these cottages are from the 1700s.
Right. So
we're going back. So it's either one of those 2. And because we were so brassic at that point, we were so skint that, the Dig for Victory thing was like, oh, well, we're back on Pig Row in the 1700s. And that's how we did it. That's how it came about. So it became life on Pig Row, and it came about me, my wife, and my son now he's a teenager and doesn't want to be doesn't want anyone to know he was involved with it. Well, that's teenagers for you. So that's where it came about, really, and just keeping initially a record of what we were doing, and it just grew from there. When we hit the wartime garden, it was because it was so funny, and you had to write about how things went wrong. People started to like the fact that things had gone wrong, and me trying to find a solution to growing potatoes and not getting blight, or growing brassicas and keeping the cabbage whites off, and all this kind of stuff, because I had absolutely no knowledge of any organic gardening. And I was like most gardeners. I went to the garden centre, I picked up a bed of bedding plants, I threw them in the ground, and I walked away. That was it. I got myself a shrub, and through that I started to learn all the botanical Latin. I started to go on courses, and it became such a fascinating world to me that it just snowballed from there. And I think people like it because I don't try and paint an idyllic picture of what it's like to garden. If I make a mistake, I'll tell you, and I'll show you what an idiot I've been. And that's even with knowledge. I've got 13 years of knowledge now, and I still make mistakes. And I've talked to old-time gardeners who've been doing it forever, and RHS gardeners, and they still make mistakes. And I think it's lovely to be able to share mistakes with people, because there's a lot of pressure when you come to gardening that it has to be perfect.
I totally agree, Andrew. I think, I've gardened all my life as a job, and yes, mistakes happen, don't they? No two seasons are the same, and what grows well one year isn't necessarily going to grow well the next year. And I think it is good to share that sometimes, because you often learn from your mistakes, and lots of other people can learn from the mistakes that you've made. So it's all part of the learning process, definitely.
I remember planting Verbena borealis, and I love that plant, and I kind of mislabeled it, and I think I just put Verbena on it, and I assumed it was a short, compact version of it, and it wasn't. And I put it in a hanging basket.
Yeah.
So I escaped swaves of Verbena borealis wafting at least 12 foot above my head.
It could be a new fashion.
It could be, but it did make me laugh when I did it. You're like, oh my god, I can't believe I've done that. I wish someone would invent an indelible ink pen that actually lasts the season.
Well, yes. Well, there you go. Good. Well, what we'll do, we're going to take a little break, and then we'll come back to you, and we'll find out more about what you're doing at Pig Row and some of the other things, your YouTube videos and all of that, Andrew. So we'll be back with you in a few minutes.
I think it's fantastic listening to Andrew. I mean, it's really interesting that he's doing this gardening blog, and has been doing for more than 10 years, I think he said, or 10 years-ish. But also that he's gone through these various different career paths, the idea of somebody working on Eastenders back in the day when Arthur Fowler was on it, which for anyone who has never seen Eastenders, maybe some overseas listeners, Arthur Fowler was famed for having an allotment on Eastenders. Now, I don't watch Eastenders, but even I know that.
Yes, exactly. Well, I did actually watch it in the early days, and yes, he would disappear down to his allotment, wouldn't he? And it's, it could have been Andrew writing some of the lines that Arthur delivered, and I wonder if that's made him think, oh, I'll have a garden.
But I love that Andrew's...
I wonder how many crimes happened down at that. Let's not go into...
I love that Andrew's journey has been so public. He has learned as he's just shared it with all his followers, hasn't it? It's great. And
well, we've said before, haven't we, about mistakes?
Yeah.
It's part of a learning process, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But I really like the idea of the verbena in a hanging basket. Well, I think we could do that, because would it just go, because it's got a really strong stem, hasn't it? But could you train it down?
No, not that one.
Excuse my ignorance. Is verbena the one that's a bit like lavender?
Yes, it does look a little bit like it, but there's various forms. So you can buy verbenas that will trail, that you buy for hanging baskets and containers. You buy them in the spring, plant them in your baskets, and then you can overwinter them, but they need heat. But the one Andrew put in was Verbena bonariensis, which is a hardy perennial that you put in your garden. And, we've put some in our new border at the front this year, and they're probably 5 feet tall. Yeah. So I don't think there's anything you could really do to make it fit a hanging basket, unless it was a giant hanging basket. But, Andrew admitted he made a mistake, and I think we all make mistakes. I've been gardening all my life, and I do things and thought, you shouldn't have done it that way because it's not going to work. But you try different things, don't you? And that's what it's all about. That's how you learn.
I admit, I once put a non-trailing tomato in a hanging basket, and guess what? It didn't trail.
No, exactly. As much as you wanted it to, it didn't do it, did it?
Did you just keep looking at
to will it to.
and thinking, is it?
Bending the stem every now and then. Just like shaping it. I was hoping that. We have had a question on one of the videos online. If you're up for this, Martin.
Yeah.
Jason says he's inexperienced at gardening, but he has a small deciduous magnolia about 5 or 6 feet tall. We don't want it to grow much taller, so wondering what time is the best time of year to give it a prune, and any top tips for this type of tree, please. He says they live on the south coast of the UK, about 500 metres from the sea. Sounds lovely. But the tree is well sheltered, it says.
Okay, Jason. Well, we don't know what type of magnolia it is, but the two that are most commonly planted are Magnolia stellata, that's got small star-shaped white flowers, springtime, or the other one is Magnolia soulangeana, which has got more, it looks a bit more like a tulip. Sometimes it's called a tulip magnolia. They sort of go up in a tulip shape and quite often dark at the base of the flowers. The latter, soulangeana, if allowed to grow to its natural height, would probably get to 25, 30 feet and make quite a big, almost tree-like shrub. Stellata is the smaller of the two, but even that will grow to, 10, 12 feet, 3 to 4 metres if you didn't do any pruning. They don't like to be pruned too much. That's the problem. They've got a lovely, graceful, natural shape. And if you start pruning them, you can lose it. And I do know of one in a garden, which is the soulangeana, the bigger one. And the people have pruned it to about 6 or 7 feet. Every year they cut it hard back. But they don't get an awful lot of flower in it because they're cutting off the flowering buds. So if you do want to prune yours, just don't go mad with it. Do it as a light prune, and the time to do the pruning is immediately after it's flowered. So when the last of the flowers has faded in late spring, you can give it a bit of a selective prune. Don't take the shears or the hedge cutter over it because it'll look horrible. You want to prune it so you're reducing some of the wood that's flowered, and then what it will do is produce some new growth from where you've pruned it back to. I mean, you're probably only going to prune back maybe, a foot. It will produce some new shoots through the summer, and it's on the tips of the new wood that the buds will form in the autumn to flower the following season. So you can keep it smaller and still maintain a shape if you're just a bit careful how and when you prune it. Does that make sense, Mrs.
I think
Fish?
So, yeah.
Yes, and we've got a magnolia we're going to plant in our garden, and I don't want it to get huge, so I'm going to adopt a similar method with it. And if you can do it before they get too big, it's much easier, and it keeps the shape.
Maybe we could do a video on magnolias.
Yes, if you make a note of that, director, producer, because I'll forget.
Add it to the list. Talking of videos, our latest video is about looking after plants in the greenhouse, and the previous one is about giant onion planting, so do check those out on YouTube. Also, if you've got a question for Martin, info@pots&trowels is the email address to use. Just send us an email on info@pots&trowels, or you can just leave us a comment or a Facebook message or something like that if that's how you prefer to get in touch. Drop us a message and we'll answer your question.
Right, I think time to get back to Andrew and life on Pig Row.
So Andrew, life on Pig Row's been going now for probably well over 10 years, isn't it? And it's very established. So one of the things you do is you do lots of videos. You're very active on social media, and videos is one way that you communicate with people. So how do you find all of that? Because, having written for television, now you're standing in front of a camera and telling people what to do. How do you find that?
Initially, I used to stand there very wooden, and this is me pointing at things. And it was really bad, and then I thought, I've got to do something about this. And I got some really nice advice from Liz Bliver about how to look at a camera. And also I started putting pictures up of people that I liked on top of the camera. So I was talking to them, because it's really unusual being sat in a greenhouse on your own, because I tend to do it on my own, because I think I'd be too frightened to do it in front of Carol. She does it occasionally with me, and I kind of go back to being very wooden again, because I don't mind. I think the kind of key for me was when I didn't mind appearing like a bit of a fool. Yeah, I think that was the key. I think it was a video and I dropped something when I was trying to film and get the angle, and I filmed it, and I thought, you know, I'm going to keep it in. You know, and I thought, you know, let's go for it. So yeah, because I do tell lots of jokes, you know, and I do get, you know, kind of my kind of defense mechanism is to make people laugh and enjoy themselves and feel comfortable. So yeah, I think I've improved. If you go back 10 years ago and watch those early videos, you're kind of like, and also I realized even this is kind of a mask that you put on, you know, because I talked to someone recently, oh, you seem so exciting and so interesting. And I thought, you've not seen me on a Saturday night when I'm knackered.
Yeah.
And I'm sat there and I don't want to talk to anyone.
They're seeing the face, aren't they? That's there when you're performing.
Yeah, so it is kind of a bit of a performance. And I think it helped with doing an English background and being involved in television and meeting actors and so forth and so on. I got a few tips off them and old actor friends. They went, you've got to do this and this. It's still the truth. It's still me, but it's a more heightened version of me. You know, because I've got to get across enthusiasm and love and joy, which is what is the heart of life on Pig Row. It's always been like that for me, because when we were both unemployed and it was austerity years, you had to find the joy where you could grab it. And I wanted to spread that joy as far as I could. And that's what gardening is for me. It's pure joy. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to give it a go. You don't have to go to the garden centre to do it. You've got everything that you need 9 times out of 10 in your kitchen, just sat there waiting to be used. So that's where that came from, yeah. And I've forgotten the question now.
No, we were talking about doing the videos. You've answered it perfectly. Yeah. And although it tends to be you in front of the camera, Carol is very much part of the team, isn't she? You know, she's a lot of cooking
Carol's got a very different approach to me. I'll just switch the camera on and go for it with a very loose idea of what I'm doing today. You know, for example, I'll go, we're planting rhubarb seeds. This is what we're going to do. So if Carol has to have everything meticulous, you'll say to me, what am I doing? So you say, I've got to do this. I want to show me how to make a Victoria sponge. I'll do that for you. And she'll have to have all the ingredients laid out, know where everything is, where the camera's going to be, because that's where I met Carol. I met her at the BBC, and she was on the production side.
Right.
So she's very much more of that production side, whereas more on the creative side. So she has to know where everything is. And if it goes wrong, I have to switch the camera off straight away because she doesn't want it on camera. So she's, and I love her to bits for that, because it introduces me to ideas of how things should be cut, how things should move in a film when you're doing something, you know, close-ups and all stuff like that. Where before I was kind of like, if I was showing you something, I'd hold it up to the camera. Almost like, hey, well, look at this.
Whereas the camera can move as well, yes.
You forget that. Honestly, you forget that. And then you realise, even my camera's changed. So when I first started it, it was, I think, there's something called a bloggy, which was a small camera. Then I moved into something more professional. And now I'm literally on my mobile phone, because mobile phone quality's got so good.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it is, isn't it? Not just for filming, but for photographs and everything. Amazing, yeah.
So you know, it's really strange. You kind of gone from something that was quite bulky to something that's really, really tiny, but then all the paraphernalia around it is still bulky. So all the tripods that I use, all the kind of things for white lights and stuff like that, I've still got to use them. And I've got to be conscious of lighting as well, because you can get those ring lights now.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, because I wear glasses, I end up with a halo.
Oh, right. Yes.
So if it's particularly gloomy, and I have to use lighting, I have to take my glasses off, which is really awful, because then I can't see the camera. So I'm vaguely looking in that direction, you know, like going like a blind bat. So yeah, Carol has to plan everything. My son used to be on it, years ago, and he was very much like me, but he's very funny because he was a little child. He liked to play up for the camera. So he'd go, welcome to Little D's show. And you're like, oh, here we go. And you have to try and calm him down between takes. You'd bounce around. So you're going to stay on camera. If you want to do this, you're going to stay on camera. So with him, it was very much catch him while you could,
Yeah.
and then wander off because his attention was very short. But
And now he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to be embarrassed to be doing it with his dad now.
But weirdly enough, he's become a podcaster.
Right.
He's become a podcaster, but he's interested in gaming, as most teenagers are. So he has his own really successful podcast, which I'm not going to promote, because he does enough of that himself. And he really enjoys that. But obviously, he's talking about gaming, and he's slowly coming back to gardening. I didn't want to force him. So he's doing his Duke of Edinburgh at the moment. And I suggested to him getting involved in community gardens and Incredible Edible. And he's got involved with that, and he's really loved that.
I think the fact that he's grown up knowing that you garden and Carol gardens, and my children sort of drifted away, but they all now do a bit of gardening in their adult life, and it's a bit of a pun, I know, but it sows that seed, doesn't it? And then they can come back to it. So you mentioned podcasts. You do a podcast as well, don't you?
Yes,
you tend to get out and about and meet people on that. Plans to do more?
I hope so. Next year, I've had a few people who want to do it with me and come forward. I'm very interested in the everyday gardener, the allotment owner, the person with the small plot, the person of make, do, and mend and sustainability. I'm interested in those kind of gardeners. I have done some big gardens. I've gone and seen big gardeners there, but it never felt unique. It never felt full of joy, even though those people are full of joy and they love it. There's something about someone who does it for themselves with minimum budgets, who really go for it, that really excite me, because you can see the joy in their face, that this is my garden, I put my stamp on it. Where a lot of the big gardens are lovely, and I love big gardens, and I love going to all the RHS gardens, but there's almost a heavy feeling of history there lying over it all, that you can't get away from, which if you don't know the history of the garden, then sometimes you miss the whole story. Whereas when you meet people who are doing their gardens up, it's their history and it's personal to them, and they can tell you in one podcast. Whereas if I sat down and started talking to many fine RHS head gardeners, we could be there for weeks.
Yes, true.
Talking about those gardens. I'm very interested in that everyday gardener doing it for themselves. The people who make mistakes, the people who aren't afraid to tell you they make mistakes, the people who just said, I've tried this year. Have you tried this? And that toing and throwing backwards and forwards, where it's almost just like a conversation over each other. I did try it with more than one-to-one. I did try it with like 3 or 4 people at once, but it became a free-for-all. And you couldn't hear anything. So that one-to-one thing was lovely. I love going on allotments. I still adore allotments to this day. And I think that's because of my dad, and my earliest memories are on an allotment. And since I lost my dad, I think that's become much more important to me. And it's lovely to go on allotments and see that mosaic, that tapestry of plots. And everybody's doing something different. And I love that.
Yeah, they are special.
Yeah, you've got hundreds of stories there, and I love those stories. I love the stories behind gardeners. I always have loved the stories behind the garden. And I think that's the scriptwriter in me.
Yeah, that's right. The story there. Yes, that's always with you. And finally, your garden, you've got 1/4 acre, haven't you, at the back of the house? We see it on your socials a lot. So, and I know it's sort of it's evolving and being redeveloped. I think you're working on the kitchen garden at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm doing a new kitchen garden. The old kitchen garden, which we put raised beds into, I wanted to turn more into a potager and more of a cutting garden for florals. And I wanted a bigger veg patch, which was more on the level. The problem is, where I am, it's all uphill. There's only one section which is about midway along the garden that's relatively flat. And for years, I've been saying to my wife, I'm going to put my veg patch there. And last year we started on it. So that's where we are now. So the idea behind that is nothing new is going to come in. So I've got a secondhand greenhouse. So that's there, ready to go up. But also my raised beds that I'm going to make are going to be made out of stone, because I dig out a lot of stone up here.
Right, yeah.
So I'm going to use them for my raised beds rather than buying wood. So it's all about being more sustainable and using what you've got, and to show what you can do with a limited budget. Not necessarily no budget, just a limited budget, and using what you already have and still finding that joy. So yeah, that's what that veg patch will be. Even to the point where, I think earlier this year we created a load of dead hedges just to screen them all off, and all that was recycled from our hedges. Because we decided our hedges had got too big, so we cut them back by half. I had all this material. I didn't want to burn it because it annoys the neighbours, and also it's not environmentally friendly. And I thought, well, let's dead hedge. So we did that for the first time, and I've not done any dead hedging. Oh God, I think last time I did dead hedging was somewhere in my teens.
Right, there you go. But it puts it to good use, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think more or less everything that's in the garden, whether it's prunings and that, you can shred or use them as pea sticks or put them to good use. Yeah, they don't want to be going to be burnt or landfill particularly. So if people want to follow, how can they do it, Andrew? How can they follow what you're up to on Life and Pig Row?
On X, it's on Life and Pig Row. Instagram, Life and Pig Row again. On Facebook, just search for Life and Pig Row. You'll find us. In fact, right across all the platforms, it's just Life and Pig Row.
Easy to find.
Easy to find, yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, well, that's good to catch up with you, find out what you're doing. And one day when I'm going over the M62, I'll do that little detour, give you a wave and come and have a cup of tea and have a look what you're doing. That would be lovely. Andrew, thank you very much for taking time out to have a chat to us, and hopefully see you around somewhere, maybe in the summer at one of the flower shows.
Hopefully. I think I might go to Southport again this year. I've not been for a while.
Well, we're there, so we'll try and catch up and have a cup of tea, or even better still, something a bit stronger.
Okay. All right, Martin. Okay.
Cheers.
I've got to be honest, I've never heard the term dead hedging before. What is dead hedging?
Well, it isn't a hedge that's died.
There's
a pause there.
Well, but you do see some conifer hedges that have just gone completely brown, don't you? So you think that's a dead hedge.
It is a dead hedge.
I think I've killed hedges before as well. Yeah, no, that's not it.
It's not what was once a healthy hedge that suddenly died and been left. It's created. It's more, I suppose, to describe it, it's probably more of a fence than a hedge. And
like upcycling.
Yes, it is. So if you've been pruning in the garden and you've got lots of, shrub prunings or apple prunings, anything, doesn't matter what it is. There's various ways I've seen it done. Some people put wire netting in two rows, almost like two mini fences of wire netting with a gap between them, and then they stuff it with all the prunings, large and small. And then the idea is it's creating wildlife habitat, and you can make it as low or as tall as you want it to be.
So you'd pack them in?
Yeah.
You'd kind of do layers. Chop them up. So it's not going to happen in one sitting, is it? You're going to add to it, and then presumably those layers,
over time, then,
the layers will drop a bit as well, so you can keep on adding
Absolutely,
to it.
And it will break down eventually. And people put dried leaves in there as well, especially if you've got the net in. So you're creating this wildlife habitat for all sorts, mammals, insects, that type of thing. And the other way I've seen it done is where if you've got bigger prunings, long prunings, where they knock posts into the ground and then weave the various prunings through it.
But then you couldn't use up the sort of shorter cuttings.
No, not as easily. No. Sometimes I've seen
people do that weaving thing with live.
Well, exactly.
Well, I thought that could you put some willow in between, in amongst your dead hedge, and then you'd get a little bit of green as well.
So you'd have a half living, half dead one, wouldn't you? Exactly. Yeah.
Like a zombie hedge.
I think. At the end of the day, there aren't any rules. You can do exactly what you want to do with it.
I mean, it's not going to look pretty. You wouldn't want it.
I was thinking what it'd look like.
That
was my thought. I like the idea of having a bit of green in it.
Yes, yeah.
I think if I were to do one, I would try and do it. You can buy these woven fence panels with hazel or willow. I'd try to replicate that, I think. And you could do it. You could do two and then still stuff it. So if you did them parallel, about 30, 45 centimetres, a foot or 18 inches apart, and then you've got a hollow piece in the centre that you can stuff loads of other stuff in as well. So,
but if you'd got an allotment, you could do it as a bit of a boundary on an allotment, and that would be really good then for the wildlife.
It's an excellent money-saving idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, having been out to buy a fence panel over this Christmas break because one of the gales blew one of ours away, and then I noticed it was rotten, so I had to buy a new one, which is when I discovered that whoever had put the fence posts in had either previously used very narrow fence posts or basically not left enough room for fence panel. So I had to get a circular saw out and slice a bit off each side. It was a really good, fun job to be doing on Christmas Eve. I really enjoyed
That's
it.
what you
Thanks
need.
for that.
Always happens at Christmas time, doesn't it? Or if it's getting dark. Exactly. So that's
Anyway,
a dead
yes.
hedge. So and of course we've got to remember living hedges are also very good for wildlife.
Yes. Bit more maintenance though.
Well, you don't have to trim a dead
Yeah.
hedge.
Depends if you've got a circular saw or not. Anyway, Martin, anything we should be doing in the garden this
Well,
this time of
on
year,
the
then?
subject of dead hedges, I suppose, because, Christmas, New Year have now gone, there were lots of real Christmas trees lying on people's gardens or waiting to be taken to the recycling centre or to be chopped up or whatever. You could use an old Christmas tree to start part of a dead hedge.
Chop it up first, don't just shove
chop
the
it
whole
up,
tree.
exactly, yeah. And even if you didn't do a dead hedge with it, you can still recycle it, because if you can chop it up, the small bits you could shred, and then you could chop the trunk up and the thicker stems and make a little mini log pile at the back of a border, which again is great for wildlife. So you don't certainly need to burn it or send it away. If you can deal with it yourself, if you've got a little saw or some loppers, you can chop that up and put it all to good use within your garden.
Shall I tell you what I do with mine? So ours is in a bay window. So I bring the compost bin under the window, and I open the window, I get my secateurs, and I snip each branch off and drop it through the
well
window
done.
into the
Clever.
compost bin, leaving it in situ in its holder until all I'm left with is a trunk sitting in the holder, which I obviously take out.
Yeah.
Which means that
Very
we
good.
don't get pine needles all through the house.
Yeah,
Clever
very
idea,
good.
Sean.
Because you do keep
Top tip.
finding them months afterwards, don't you?
That happens whatever. That
Yeah.
happens whatever. you can't beat that. One thing, I'm kind of jumping topics slightly, but there was mention, I think it was in the first part actually, about Dig for Victory, and Andrew was talking about Dig for Victory. I was thinking if people knew what that is. I mean, probably most of our listeners do, but that, as I understand it, that was like a wartime thing, right?
Yes, it was. It came about in the Second World War, and it was basically a need to produce more food, because obviously food couldn't be imported for obvious reasons of the war. So it was to encourage not only farmers to grow more, but the general public. So, in towns and cities, parks would have been ploughed up and put back to fields or allotments. So it was basically where there was a big area of grass, let's turn that somewhere into where we can grow fruit and vegetables and potatoes and cabbages, things that were easy to grow, would be planted. And it was a big movement in the Second World War. There were groups set up for it. We talk of a fertiliser called Growmore quite often. Growmore was developed in the Second World War as a cheap fertiliser, so people could get their plants growing and grow vegetables.
I didn't know
So
that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was a big movement at the time, and I think that spurred on then a lot more people having allotments after the war and then carried on growing. So it started a sort of vegetable growing revolution in a way.
And I noticed that Andrew mentioned it was sort of a austerity type thing. That was some of the government policies of stopping kind of public spending. But more recently in COVID times, we had people, I think, taking a leaf out of the Dig for Victory book, because we were worried about there not being food in the shops. I mean, I think in the most part there was food in the shops, but there was a concern, wasn't there?
Yes. Well, and people had more time as well to think about it and to spend that time growing
Yeah.
fruit and veg,
Well,
didn't they?
exactly.
Which was great. I mean, that was a real positive out of COVID,
Yeah.
if there was one.
And if you think back in the war and after the war into the early 1950s, food was rationed. So, it was, bread and meat and eggs and pretty much everything. Butter was rationed. But if you could grow your own potatoes and your vegetables, that really supplemented your diet and made a meal go much further. So it was a great idea.
And in the UK, rationing carried on till 1954.
54
I
was
was
it?
looking it up. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm looking it up after.
You don't remember it then, Sean?
Me, not personally, no.
No.
That's 20 years before my time.
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
but I did notice quite a lot of resources for Dig for Victory online. So I suppose there to kind of, if you want to go and try and take a leaf out of the Dig for Victory book, you can see online. I think there's even digforvictory.org or something
Oh,
like that, where
really?
you can basically go and read about it. But I don't know, maybe they've got information about how to grow like they did.
Well, the time, I mean, obviously there was no internet back then, but the government did produce lots of booklets and pamphlets on growing so that people that had never done it before in cities could learn how to grow veg.
A lot of cookery books as well were produced, weren't they, to make the most of absolutely everything and improvise as well. There were a lot of substitutions for food that they couldn't get.
What I did want to touch on as well is the fact that, it's been very, very wet across the whole of the UK. I've lost count of how many storms we've had, but I think we do a bit of dry weather. But it was really just to let people know, if you've got a very wet, soggy garden, keep off it. The last thing you want to be doing is traipsing over your allotment, over your vegetable plot, walking across the lawn, because you're just going to churn it up into mud. So leave off it. If you have got to go onto your vegetable garden for whatever reason, maybe put an old plank of wood down so that will spread your weight. And if you've got a piece of lawn that's sitting wet and soggy, and we've got a bit at the side of our drive, I'm going to get my garden fork, push it in, just wiggle it around a little bit, just to help the drainage and get a bit of air down into the soil. But otherwise, leave it until it naturally dries enough that you can walk on it without it being too squelchy.
Sounds like some very good advice. And unfortunately, the Father Christmas and the elves didn't bring me a new fork, so I won't be doing that. Otherwise, I'll be churning up the turf with my broken tines.
Well, it could be your birthday soon, Sean. So you never know. You could put that on your birthday list.
Yeah, that'll be good. I'm going to do it. I'll have it on my list. Fantastic.
Right.
Well, look, it's been great. Well, I think we've probably run out of time, haven't we?
We have run out of time, yeah. So yes, but we'll be back again next time doing it all.
Yeah. See you next week.
Bye. Watch the videos on YouTube or Facebook, follow us on Instagram, Twitter or X, and subscribe to the podcast and never miss a thing. For more information, go to pots&trowels.com.